Well, we're coming this morning to our last lesson from the Olivet Discourse, and we've spent the last 6 weeks. Today makes our 7th lesson from this teaching that Jesus shared with his disciples on that Tuesday night going into Wednesday of Holy Week. This teaching revolves, as we've seen, around a period of time in the future that scholars call Daniel's 70th week. 69 weeks, 69 sets of 7 years of the prophecy that Gabriel gave to Daniel. 69 of those sets have been fulfilled, and fulfilled in detail, as we've seen, down to the very day that the Messiah would be presented to Israel. We saw that a few weeks ago on what we know as the Palm Sunday portion of Scripture. But there still is that 70th week, that last set of 7 years that has not happened yet. And so, in this teaching, Jesus gives us a sneak peek into that week. So let's pray before we go into this last section. Father, we pray that you will bless this time of study, that you will open our hearts and our understanding, that we may see in this Scripture what was actually taught, what Jesus was teaching for that week. May we see the applications for our own lives, but may we understand the context of the teaching and how important that is. We pray your blessing upon us this morning as we share in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're picking up this morning with verse 31 of chapter 25 of Matthew. Now, this is often referred to as the parable of the sheep and the goats. And as I said last week, I don't think this is simply a parable. I think this is a real event. This is a picture of a real event that will take place at the end of the tribulation, at the end of that 70th week, that last set of 7 years. Jesus' teaching on this period of time was prompted, as you remember, by his disciples' question in verse 3 of chapter 24. As we read them, it sounds like 3 questions, but it's actually just 2 questions. Look back at that, chapter 24, verse 3. They'd just come out of the temple complex. Jesus had said the temple will be left to you desolate, and so they ask him questions. When he finally gets to the Mount of Olives and he is alone with them, verse 3 says, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" How are we going to know? What's it going to be like? What's going to take place? And then Jesus launches into this teaching. The age that he is speaking of here, the age will culminate with a judgment upon the Jews. We can read a fuller prophecy of that time just by reading the book of Revelation. But here, in these 2 chapters, Jesus gives this brief account of that time. And Jesus begins by giving an overview, or we might say an outline. Verses 4 through 14 of chapter 24 depict the first half of the tribulation. Verses 15 through 20 give us the midpoint of the tribulation. And then verses 21 and 22 give us the ending of the tribulation. Verses 23 through 26 give the detail of what Jesus refers to as false Christs and false prophets. We know that is explaining the Antichrist and the false prophet. Verses 27 through 31 of chapter 24 reveals the coming of the Son of Man, the true Christ, that very ending point of the tribulation. Revelation 19 verse 16 describes him as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So then, after giving this outline, Jesus then goes back and through a series of 8 parables begins to fill in some of the details around this time. The first parable we saw, the parable of the fig tree, told the disciples, and not only the disciples, but any and all who would read this throughout the ages, that the general time of the end could be known. Just like, it's like this, Jesus said, when the trees start putting out, he says here in Matthew the fig tree, but in Luke he says, and all the other trees. So we know it's a picture. When the trees start putting out, we know that spring is near. We were coming to church this morning and Joe said, the trees are just about ready to bust open. The leaves are tiny. They're not only just tinged red on the ends now you can begin to see tiny little leaves coming on. And so we know it's getting closer and closer. And Jesus has said when the trees start putting out, you know that summer is near. And we saw in that lesson that when the trees start putting out and summer comes, then naturally what comes after that is fruit. And what comes with the fruit comes the harvest. And anytime we read harvest in Matthew's gospel, it is referring to judgment. And we think of judgment as being a hard thing or a bad thing, but it's not. Judgment is simply separating the good from the bad. It's just simply distinguishes or separates the bad from the good. But verse 36 then of chapter 24 tells us that we may not know exactly when the Son of Man is coming, but the time frame or the era can be observed. And we also know this. Verse 37 of chapter 24. We know what the days will be like. The days will be like the days of Noah. And we talked in that lesson about what that would be like. And we see that even in our day, the population of today, many scholars think the population of today, the days of Noah, the population of the earth had reached about the same as it is today. Not only was the atmosphere the same in the fact that there was evil, not only were people just going on with life as they are today, but there were many parallels from the days of Noah to today. We talked a little bit what that would look like, and that's the second parable. But the most important thing about that parable comes in verse 39 of chapter 24, when Jesus says, and they, all those who were living in the days of Noah, did not understand until the flood came and took them away. Took them away in judgment. We know that Noah and his family got on the ark, and so it took them away in judgment. And that sets the context for the things that come after that. That tells us what the things that come after that is really saying. It took them away. The next parable explained that some would be taken in judgment and some would be left to enter the kingdom that the Son of Man would be ushering in. These verses 40 and 41 are not a picture of the rapture as many teach because of the context. The ones are taken in judgment. The ones that are left to enter this new kingdom that Matthew's been talking about since chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through the kingdom, introducing the king of the kingdom. In fact, in Matthew, in this Olivet Discourse, it is the exact opposite of the rapture. In the rapture, it is not a good thing to be left behind. But here, it is a good thing left to enter the kingdom. But after that, then, in the next 4 parables, Jesus went to great lengths to make it clear that the Master was going to be gone for a time. A long time. And no one's going to know when he's coming back. But the clear thing is, he is coming back. You can't count on that. We sang just a moment ago, standing on the promises. That's a promise you can stand on. I don't care what it looks like out there. You can stand on that promise. He is coming back. You can count on it. And so, as we saw last week, these parables taught that those who are waiting on his return are to be alert. Verse 42 of chapter 24. Therefore be on the alert. Why? For you do not know which day your Lord is coming. They were also to be ready. Verse 44. For this reason you should be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour, at a time when you do not think he will. And the parable of verses 45 through 51 of chapter 24 taught that faithfulness was expected as they wait. And did you notice, and I think I mentioned this last week, but each of these parables, as we watch them and we read them, each of these parables get progressively more severe as we go along. Verses 50 and 51 of chapter 24 says, the master of that slave, the one who was not faithful, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know, and shall cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. Weeping shall be there, and the gnashing of teeth. Anytime you see this phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth, that's a picture of the final judgment, of eternal judgment, of that bottomless pit, that eternal fire. And it gets more and more progressive as we go along. The parable of the 10 virgins in chapter 25 taught that those waiting must be prepared. And the parable of the talents showed that we must be faithful in using what we've been given to the best of our ability. Each is given according to their ability. And again, in both of these parables, the judgment was very severe. Verses 12 and 13 of chapter 25 said, 12 and 13, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Or 11, let's go back to 11. The virgins came and said, Lord, open up. And he said, I don't even know you. The word there for know is I don't see you. I don't even see you. I don't even acknowledge you. But be on the alert, for you do not know the day or the hour. And then again, verse 30 said, and this was the one with the talents, cast out the worthless slave into outer darkness. In that place, and here we go again, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The judgments are very severe. And now we come to this last story in this section. Look at verse 31. But when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him. When? It doesn't say if. When. You can count on it. Make no mistake, the Son of Man will come when He comes. Jesus gave the overview of this period of time before the parables. And He ended with verses 30 and 31 of chapter 24 when He said, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. That's at the end of the tribulation. All the tribes of the earth will mourn, and then they will see Him. They will see Him coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And He will send forth His angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together His elect. Remember, the elect we're talking about here is His chosen people, the Jews. They will gather His elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. He is coming. And now He's going to tell us what will happen when He comes, when the Son of Man does come back. Again, verse 31 of chapter 25. But when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, then, this is what's going to happen, then He will sit on His glorious throne. Now, many have taught that this describes the judgment of believers and unbelievers, and we could certainly find an application for that. But in its context, in the context of what Jesus is teaching here, this is not about just believers and unbelievers in Christ. This is a specific group of people. This is at the end of the tribulation and the judgment that will take place at the end of the tribulation. As we've seen, the events of verses 4 through 26 of chapter 24 correspond with the events found in the book of Revelation, chapters 6 through 18. And now the first part of verse 31 of chapter 25, but when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all His angels with Him, fits right in with Revelation 19 verse 11. I mean, they're just parallel verses. Jesus said it would happen, and then John tells us that this is what he saw. Revelation 19:11 begins, John says, and I saw heaven open, and behold a white horse. and he who sat on it is called faithful and true. That's what we just read here. That's the sign that Jesus said is going to come. This is the Son of Man coming in his glory. And then Matthew 25:31, as we said, continues, and he will sit on his glorious throne. This fits right in with the rest of Revelation 19:11. The second portion of the sentence says, and in righteousness he judges and he makes war. And we will see in the following verses of Matthew 25 that what Jesus is telling us at the end of chapter 25 of Matthew fits in between he judges and he makes war. This is the judgment. You can take this last part of Matthew 25 and go over to Revelation 19 and draw you an arrow and write it in there. This is what takes place. This is how he judges. He first judges and then he wages war. This is the judgment that takes place of those who are alive at the end of the tribulation. When the tribulation period is over, there is a judgment that comes of people who are left alive on the earth. Let's go back to the beginning of the tribulation. When the church is raptured out, everyone that's left on earth is a non-believer. Got that? Understand that? When the believers are taken out, everyone else left on the earth is a non-believer. As they go through this 7-year period, some will come to faith in Christ. Many of them will be martyred. Many of them will lose their lives for the fact that they've come to faith in Jesus Christ. Many will lose their lives. But when we get to the end of tribulation, there will be some believers and some unbelievers that have come to faith during this time of the tribulation. When Gabriel appeared to Mary to tell her that she would bear the Christ child, she was told that this child that she would have would be called the Son of the Most High, and she was told he will be given the throne of his father David. Here's where we see it happening. Jesus will sit on a throne at this time for this judgment. In fact, as we read here, it's called his glorious throne. And I'm sure you've heard this story before. Look at verses 32 and 33. When he sits on this glorious throne, verse 32 says, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. So the question comes up, who will be gathered before him and how will he separate them? You notice it says he judges the nations. The word for nations is ethnos. This is the Gentiles. You only have two people in the Bible. You have Jews and you have Gentiles. Well, actually you have Samaritans, which are a mix between. But you have Jews and you have Gentiles. So you're either judging Jews or you're judging Gentiles. So he's judging the Gentiles. He's judging the nations. But notice this, they are not judged as whole nations, but as individuals within those nations. This tells us everyone is responsible for their own belief. No one can say, I was just following orders. Everyone is responsible for their own belief. Jesus uses this symbolic language of sheep and goats to describe these individuals. The sheep are the good guys, the goats are the bad guys, which as I was studying this, it kind of intrigued me because that's just the opposite of our day today. Today we talk about people who are sheep. We accuse them of being people who have no mind. They just follow what they're told to do. You're just being a sheep. And the goats, on the other hand, we call the great ones. Some of your great sports figures are called the GOAT. Greatest of all time, G-O-A-T. So we look in our lives, it's just the opposite, but not for Jesus. The sheep are the good guys and the goats are the bad guys. Well, what's the reward for the sheep? Verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right hand. Notice this is the first time Jesus has referred to himself as the king. Jesus has been called a lot of things in Scripture. Of course, his favorite title for himself is Son of Man. Others have called him a lot of things: the Christ, the Son of the living God, Son of David, Master, Teacher, Rabbi. But here he acknowledges that one day he will be king. He will rule and judge as king. Remember, Matthew's whole agenda from the very beginning, from the genealogy at the very first chapter, is to prove that Jesus had a right to sit on that throne. He gives us the genealogy that says he is the one who would sit on that throne. And what does the king say? He says to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." They'd not earned this reward. How did it say they would get it? They would inherit it. Only a child, or those grafted in, are those who inherit. No one earns their way into the kingdom of God. They receive it as being a child of God and a fellow heir with Jesus, as Romans 8 tells us. But look at how long this had been prepared. From the foundations of the world, Ephesians 1:4 tells us that. But why? What gave them this inheritance? What made them a child that they would inherit it? 35 and 36, Jesus goes on. "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And they said, "Oh, wait a minute. We've never even seen you before. How in the world could we have done this?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me." So who are Jesus' brothers? They're the Jews. Remember, we're talking about the tribulation period. The tribulation period which will bring a judgment upon the Jews. How you treated my brethren, my brothers. How you treated the Jews. During the time of the tribulation, anti-Semitism will be worse than any time in history. We know that during the Holocaust, a third of the Jews were exterminated. But during the tribulation period, we know from Zechariah 13, verse 9, that 2/3 of the Jews will be killed. Only 1/3. Zechariah tells us only the third part will be left. In fact, if this tribulation period went on any longer, Jesus has already told us back in verse 22 of Matthew 24, he said, "Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved." If this tribulation, in God's mercy, if it had not stopped when it did, that last third would have been killed. No life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, for the sake of the Jews, those days shall be cut short. Any Gentile of the nations, any ethnos, any Gentile who cares for a Jew could only be someone who understands the importance of God's chosen people. Only a follower of Jesus Christ knows that. The works that they did here, the feeding, the clothing, the visiting, the water, everything that they did is merely evidence of salvation. Doing these things are not what saved them. Visiting them in prison, giving them food, giving them drink, giving them clothes, that's not what saves. But that's an evidence of having been saved. It's the evidence of salvation, not the source of it. In Genesis 15, God made a covenant with Abraham. And God told Abraham that he would bless anyone who blessed Abraham, and he would curse anyone who cursed Abraham. And in this judgment, we see that being fulfilled. Those who have blessed Abraham, as it were, the Jews, is being blessed. So that's the ones on the right. Well, then we come to the ones on the left, verses 41 through 45. Then he will say, the king will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels." I mean, that's pretty powerful right there. It was prepared for the devil and those fallen ones, but that's where you're going to go. "Depart from me, for I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in, naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me." Then they'll say, they'll also answer, "We've never seen you either. When did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" And he will answer them saying, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to my brothers, to the least of these my brothers, you did not do it to me." What did they not do? What we have to remember is they are not cursed because they didn't do these things. They didn't do these things because they saw no value in it. They saw no need to do it. They were not believers. They had no care for God's people. There was no faith, therefore there was no fruit. Jesus said in Matthew 12:33, "A tree is known by its fruit." James 2:20 tells us that faith without works is dead. It's not our works that save us, but our works are an evidence of salvation. And then verse 46, "And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." And here we see eternal means eternal. There are those who want to say, well, you know, judgment isn't for, hell isn't forever. They may go into a period of judgment and then they'll just sort of, they never really give you an answer, they just sort of let that trail off. No, it's the same word. If you believe in eternal life, you have to believe in eternal judgment because it's the same word used in both places. This parable, this story, I believe, is real. In its context, it is a picture of the judgment that will take place at the end of the tribulation. You and I will see this judgment take place. You and I as believers, as we're raptured out for the tribulation period to take place, when Jesus comes back in Revelation 19, if you read the rest from verse 11 on, you read that the holy ones will be coming back with him. We will come back with him. We'll see this judgment take place. Write that down somewhere and see if you don't get to see that. We'll watch this judgment take place. We'll be there for this event. But this is a picture of the judgment that will take place at the end of the tribulation, just before the 1,000-year reign begins. Once this judgment's over, you and I will live here on this earth for that 1,000-year reign. But these verses are so often taken out of context. Many times you'll see those caring for the homeless and they'll say, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, and I was thirsty and you gave me a drink, and I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was naked and you clothed me, I was sick and you visited me. That's the reason I do what I do for the homeless." Or those with prison ministries will say, that portion, "I was in prison and you came to visit me, and that's why I'm doing this, because this is what Jesus said to do." And we should certainly be doing those things. Those things are important to be done, but that's not the context of this teaching. This teaching has to do with how the Jews are treated during the tribulation. This is taken out of context, just like 1 Corinthians 15, verse 51 is often printed over the doors of nurseries in churches. You know what 1 Corinthians 15:51 says, don't you? It says, "We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." And while that's probably true in most nurseries, I don't think that's the context of what Paul had in mind when he said that. But then someone will say, haven't we just said, didn't we just talk about the hermeneutic and the rules? Didn't we just say, well, if the plain sense makes sense, that's how we're to take it? Doesn't the plain sense of this mean this is what we're to be doing? Yes, it does. In the context, we have to say, what's the context of the teaching? We must read and interpret Scripture within its context. This whole discourse, this is what's so important about this, verses 24 and 25. The reason it is so important for it to all be in the same context is because if it's not, you can make it say anything you want it to say. If it doesn't stand together, if it's not a teaching on the 70th week of Daniel, it can be made to say anything you want it to say. We can throw in the rapture. We can teach partial rapture. We can teach social justice. We can teach predestination. We can teach all kinds of stuff in this if we pick and choose what we want it to mean. But it means what it does in its context. It either stands all together or it falls apart. And regardless of what some may say, Jesus is not saying if you don't feed the hungry or clothe the naked or visit those in prison, you're going to hell. That's not what this is saying at all. It's all about the context. But one more thing as we close. Look at chapter 26, verse 1. And it came about when Jesus had finished all these words. This is how Matthew lets us know that this teaching is over. The teaching on that 70th week is finished now. What continues on in chapter 26 snaps us back to reality. Next week we'll pick up with chapter 26 and we'll see that it's just like if you've been watching a movie, sometimes if you're in a movie theater or you're so engrossed in a book that you're reading or watching a movie on TV that when it goes off, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, I'm still in the real world. Now, you walk out of the movie theater and it's the real world again. We'll be snapped back to that reality next week. But this is how we know that this teaching is over, that this is a context in and of itself. We said in another lesson that Matthew shares 5 discourses of Jesus teaching: the Sermon on the Mount, commission of the disciples, the parables in chapter 13, teaching on humility in chapter 18, and then the Olivet Discourse. And in each of these teachings, you can go back and check at the end of each one of these, Jesus or Matthew will tell us when Jesus had finished all these sayings. That's how we know that that concise section of teaching is over. And so we know from this that this teaching on the end of the age is over. As I said in our next lesson, we'll be snapped back to reality, back to the present day, just a couple of days before the crucifixion takes place. But what have we learned from this? Even though this is a teaching of what will happen during that week, that 7 years of tribulation, there's still many applications for us. There are things that we need to learn from this. Whether we're waiting on the sound of the trumpet or whether we're waiting on the return of the King, we must be alert. We must be faithful. We must be prepared. We must be in service to the best of our ability. And we must be assured that the King will come back just like He said. And like Paul told the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians 4:18, we're to comfort one another with these words. So let's pray. Father, these are intense things, and